Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Shelby Redfield, Kilgore. Welcome to the show, Shelby. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So, Shelby was born in South Korea, and you just turned 40 this year, did you say?
I
Yeah.
turned 40 in October of this year.
October,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
And so she is an adoptee and also a filmmaker. So, and I think, did you start doing that because of the healing effects you had when you were 17? That was, you said something that I saw something online that said that you first shared your story when you were 17. Is that right?
Yes. So when I was 17 years old, my adopted parents took my brother and I to Korea on a homeland tour. So there were other adoptive families with us. And I realized on that trip, like it was with my family, it was unique that we were very open about talking about how we felt about adoption. Like I was able to talk about when I, you know, had questions about my first mother and growing up, just wondering about her. So having that open conversation where I could talk about my conflicted feelings about it was I didn't I didn't realize how unique that was, that a lot of families didn't have that kind of environment. And so on this trip, it was a roller coaster ride. It was the first time being in a country where I felt like everyone looked like, I looked like everyone else, because I grew up in a predominantly white town and community, and some of the other adoptees were like we connected, that were my age, about our experiences, but there was one particular one who never really talked about it. And so being on this trip, it like forced you to think about adoption and how that made you feel. And I think, we were in this like group of us in a hotel room, because basically this trip, they would make you eat Korean food and go shopping in the markets and sightsee. And then they take you to the orphanage and you would be like immersed in this place where there are first mothers that go to this center to relinquish their rights the day that they give birth. And it's also a place where there were kids under the age of 18, where the parents were not able to take care of them at home, but they put them in this center or orphanage, and they could come visit them, but they didn't relinquish their rights. So they grew up, and so you're just surrounded by these really young kids, and then talking with these well, some of them weren't that young, you think they'll be teenagers, or some of them were in their 20s, maybe early 30s even. And we learned on that trip that if you're single and unwed, society won't accept the baby. It'll be ostracized, and then the mother also will be ostracized by their community, family, and friends. It was definitely a hard truth to learn, that it wasn't the simple narrative I grew up with, that I was given up out of love to be given a better opportunity, because of my mother was too poor to care for me. It was so much more complicated than that. And I remember like first mother said, or asked us, like, did you have a better life? And I didn't answer that. I think another adoptee did. I'm not sure what they said. I think they said yes, and explained a little bit about why. But I think I really mulled over that question, later on when I processed the trip. But there was this, after going on this emotional roller coaster ride, there was this one adoptee that I, had said she hadn't really thought about it or talked about it with her parents. And she had a breakdown. And I remember seeing her crying, and like, we're just all kids. We're all 17 or 18. I was 17 at the time. And, we tried to comfort her as best we could. But it made me so angry that her parents did not have this like open environment. And like, I just felt super irresponsible that they didn't kind of try and open that, at least even conversation before going on this trip. Like, did she really want to go on this, or did your parents want to go on this? So it made me think about, when someone is ready and timing, and, adoptive parents that are raising kids of a different race and from a different country, and how like ethical and moral that is, and if they're being responsible. And then another thing on this trip was I found out that I was able to meet my first mother. And I had always wanted that ever since I was 5, when I realized what adoption was. Like, my parents had always told me, but it didn't click until I was 5. And to me, they seemed very wealthy. They lived in this huge house. And I remember being so mad, and that why can't you guys go find her then, so she can come live in this big house? Like, why did we have to separate? Why did I have to mourn this loss so young, and like try and process that? So it's something that affected my life growing up in ways that I didn't know how it would affect me in my 20s and 30s, even with therapy. Like, my parents, uh had me talk to someone when I was 5, when it first came up. And we also talked as a family, counselor, before the trip. And my mom even told me later on that she went to individual therapy to talk about her insecurities as a mother, not feeling like she really was since I was adopted. So that would not come out on the trip, because this trip was about the kids. So I feel like my parents, they were like, our family was not perfect. That's any family. But I think they did the best they could with learning about the resources that were out there available in the 80s, when I was growing up in the 90s. Like, my mom even went to the few conferences that were available where adoptees would come and speak, adult adoptees, about their experience. So I feel like I got kind of a head start, more than a lot of other adoptees my age, and of course older adoptees that were back in the day when they were told, if it was same race, not to be told they were adopted, because they would feel less than. Like, even then they knew, in the baby scoop era, during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. I've talked to first or mothers who felt coerced into placing their babies for adoption, or surrendering is the term they use. But anyway, so I met my first mother, and it was a dream come true at the time. Like, I really felt growing up like there was a hole missing in my life, or a hole in my heart, and something missing in my life. And I thought that meeting her would fill that. And that I just wanted to know that she thought about me, if she loved me, all those things, what she looked like, if she liked to sing, all these things that I enjoy doing, that I didn't see reflected back from my parents, or, the nurture versus nature. And it was, the meeting at first was really not what I was expecting, because I was so emotional. I've always been very emotional. I wear my heart on my sleeves. And she said she was not going to cry. She's going to stay strong. But during the meeting, she was very warm, and she told me that she thought about me every day. She loved me, and that I had 2 older half brothers that she had kept. She told me only really one thing about my first father, that he was a good man and had a healthy heart. Because we didn't really think much about asking about health history at the time. I was so young, you think you're invisible when you're that young, that nothing can really hurt you. And she brought her sister along for support, and because she kept me a secret. She had remarried and had never told her husband about me. That's why she was on the fence. Right before the trip, I got this letter from the agency saying she did not want to meet me, and it was like a second rejection. And I remember not even wanting to go on the trip because what was the point? But I was convinced to still try and go, and that we could, still ask her. And so, the second time we did and told her that I was in the country, she relented. And I'm so glad she did. At the end, she did cry. I thinking back on it, like memories, it still makes me get teary-eyed, or because it was such a huge moment for me. So anytime I see something where a family member is separated or like reunite after years, it just tugs at my heart. And the aunt, it's so funny because my parents and I, we were like, we don't see how I look like her. I looked more like my aunt, is how I felt. But she had a good life, with her new husband, it seemed. And she told me that she always was going to give me away. Like, I think that was something I thought about later, that she had two sons she kept, even though they were, it was from a marriage. So I was born out of wedlock. But, for that time, that short time, I felt really whole. It was a dream come true, and it was also surreal. And I feel like a lot of adoptees don't get this kind of experience. But when I was in high school, my senior year, I went to an art school. My brother and I interviewed about the experience, I did a little documentary with two other schoolmates. One of them still a really, really close friend of mine. And I won a scholarship for it, for college. It was great. And the reason why, we did that was because we wanted to share a story and bring awareness about it. And I realized when I was being interviewed, it was a very healing experience. It was a different way to kind of process what happened. And I knew that one day I wanted to provide this for others when I was a more developed storyteller. And that happened about 10 years later. When I was 28, I started, and it wasn't adoptees that were open to interviewing with me at first. It was adoptive parents. And I was okay with that because I am still close with my parents who raised me, and I wouldn't say that I was in the fog, but I would say that, having a really great relationship with my parents made it difficult for me to navigate once adoptees came forward to say that they wanted to share their stories after seeing, my story. And adoptive parents, they're like, well, these are adoptees that were open to telling their stories, and they reached out to me because they wanted to start getting the adoptee experience out there from the adoptee, not the adoptive parents telling the story of their adopted child. It was eye-opening to me because of all of the heartbreaking stories I heard about the abuse in their adoptive homes. And also that some adoptions were not because their parents decided to place them. It was because they were lost in a third world country, and there was just no way to accurately track people down, like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old that didn't have good language skills to explain where they lived, So I have those kinds of stories. I have stories of adoptees that were abused by their their homes, and then they were adopted out as 9 or 10-year-olds to a different country, and learning the language and navigating that. I do remember, it was funny though, when I talk to adoptees that are adopted from Korea or something, and they come to the US for the first time in like the 80s. I remember my parents told me the first thing they took me to was McDonald's on the way home, and I had French fries, and I love French fries still to this day. It's like a big comfort food. And another adoptee I remember told me that it's like we connect over these little things that we first experienced when we came to the US over on the plains. But yeah, so I think hearing a lot of these stories that really were so different than mine, like a lot of families didn't talk about, like the the adoptee from that I had met when I was 17, didn't talk about their adoption. That also is a lot of adoptees I talked about. Some of them didn't really want to do searches until after their parents had died because they didn't want to upset them. And in some cases I could relate to, putting adoptive parents' feelings first as a child. I didn't talk about my identity issues as like an Asian American growing up in a predominantly white community. I mean, there was diversity in the school that I was in, but not a lot of Asians. It was other people of color. Yes.
Yeah. Can I take you back a couple of minutes? You said that meeting your there's so much there, like where do I start? Where's the next question? You said that you obviously it sounds like your mum and dad your adoptive mum and dad were very proactive, so they did all the right things, and this openness was of benefit. It helped you significantly. And you also talked about feeling whole after meeting your first mum, as to use the words. But to me, there was there some struggles after that, or?
Yes, definitely. That took me probably a year, of when I actually started feeling resentment towards my adoption, towards my Korean culture. And that was because I really thought about it. I was not the one that was kept. She did keep two children, and she didn't want to continue a relationship with me because I was still a secret. I was still shame to her. She could not be open about it. She chose a better life for herself and got married. That's how I saw it when I was a kid. And that resentment was probably one of the stages of grief that I skipped when I was a child. That's actually something I tend to do in general. Even when I found out, like I had, I'll talk about this more in depth in a bit, but when I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, when I was 36, right after the pandemic hit, I was in shock, of course, but the anger and resentment didn't come until after another adoptee friend asked, "Did you do 23andMe? What did they say about that?" Because they test for that. And I'm like, it didn't come up as I had it, but I realized talking to the genetic counselor that I worked with after I was diagnosed, and found out I am BRCA2 positive. It does run in my genes or my family. I don't know which side. That they test for like 1,000 different, there's like 1,000 different genes that could be mutated that could cause cancer. And 23andMe they only test for 3 strands. So that's what I was so angry about that, because I'm like, oh, okay, good. I'm not at risk for breast cancer, So that made me mad. I remember writing a scathing email to 23andMe and got barely any kind of response that was meaningful. But yeah, so I tend to be very delayed in being being angry and resentful. Something has to happen where it sort of sets it off. But yeah, I think, in my 20s, I was going through so much, processing the trip from Korea, figuring out my identity, realizing how insecure I was and impressionable I was, and going to college. My parents had also separated my senior year of high school. So that was very hard for me and heartbreaking, because I felt like our family was bonded together by love. And if one part of that was broken, it just really triggered a lot of insecurities about what adoption had done to me. And I realized, in high school, I was such a people pleaser. I mean, in my 20s too, and even now, it's very much a struggle, for me to say no to friends or, at work. But I'm aware of it. I was aware of it, talking to a therapist in my 20s. But yeah, I was always trying to, still in my 20s, fill like this hole that I was not loved enough. And so, for that little bit of time after meeting her, that was really nice. But then I think the real work started in my 20s.
Yeah.
Because when you're a kid, it's really great to be aware of, talking about adoption and things like that. But you're still kind of parroting back what you're told growing up by your parents, the small messaging I saw from like the media. So yeah, talking to other adoptees when I started interviewing, hearing their stories, also hearing about reunions other than just their first mothers, but fathers and siblings, that really made me realize how much I would like to explore that. And so there was this one Korean adoptee, who I ended up, my husband, he was my fiance at the time. We went to Korea with her and filmed her search for like her roots. She went to Korea Social Services in Seoul. And I remember being so upset for her, filming her. They had this huge stack of paperwork and they only gave her a fraction of it. And they would not release identifying information of her parents. And I did a documentary on this. So I'm okay to, share what's shared in the documentary that's open to the public. And she found out that her father had passed. And I just remember seeing like the grief on her face, like the grief that you can feel for not ever really knowing someone your entire life, but still this connection that is so deep inside of you. And to learn about that loss from someone you don't know in such a cold manner was hard for me to witness and to see her struggle, with that kind of news. We also went to Busan, where she was she was in an orphanage called like Nam Kwang, and the people there that met with us were so much more open. She also had never known what her Korean name meant, and they told her, they translated it for her, happy girl.
Yeah.
And that was such an meaningful thing to learn. And she got the address of where her parents did live, when they had put her up for adoption. She found out that her mother was very ill and just was not able to take care of the 3 children. She had 2 older sisters that she found out about. And I had asked her, do you want to go to that address, or I had gently asked her to, if we wanted to find where her father may have been buried, because she had mentioned that maybe she wanted to do that, but she wasn't ready yet. So I was I just put the question out there, but I didn't push her because this was such a big journey for her, and she had really barely thought about her adoption growing up because she was adopted. I thought it was very interesting. Like, her adopted mother was white, but her father was Chinese, American, and so she had someone that sort of looked like her in a way. So I don't know, just being a part of that story. I also did a second family search when I was there, and it was very I remember, like, I couldn't bring anyone with me, not even my fiance or Kathy. And with me, when I talked to people, I was adopted through Eastern Social Child Welfare Society. Um, they said they had sent a letter to the address of where my father supposedly lived, and they think that someone who they believe is my sister answered the door. And I remember just thinking, I have a sister, like on my father's side. And when she said that they got no contact from either my first mother or first father, I just immediately cried. I'm like, here I am in Korea, so close to them in Seoul, and they're not willing to meet with me. But I had to set that aside because I was filming another story, but it was still all like also emotional. When we were at that site, we also did a tour, and they have a lot of babies still at the facility, like NICU babies. And it's so conflicting seeing these kids that are going to be adopted out. And they're just these innocent babies, their whole life ahead of them. And you don't know if it'll be a really, huge struggle for them. In many ways, it will. It may not be when they're a kid. A lot of adoptees, when they have loving parents, that those sorts of feelings don't necessarily come up, or they do, they might shove them aside because they want to be respectful of their parents that they love and feel grateful towards. And so sometimes it won't come up until they're much older. I think with these interviews, I'm always looking for, how can we do better? I feel like there's always sadly going to be adoptions or families that parents may not be able to take care for them. So temporarily, they may have to be raised by another family member or someone outside of the family. It's been going on since, the beginning of time of humans. So I'm just always looking, I feel like talking to adoptees that have grown up in partial or open adoptions, it's better for them. And it makes it more complicated in many ways, like how to navigate a relationship with a biological mother that you see once in a while may not be consistent depending on, where she's at in her life, or the father. And then when that mother gets married and has kids of her own that she keeps, like, it'll bring up all these other painful feelings of, well, why couldn't you have made it work with me, or things like that.
Yeah.
And then so it's like I still tell everyone's story because I just love connecting with other people that we can connect on this level, because it's so unique. We have all these individual experiences, and I just don't have an answer still. I feel like being open about it, and also like talking about identity and race, that's one thing I didn't have growing up, is helpful. But yeah, it's still something I'm searching for. I know for me, like, I feel like my adoption is something I will be processing the rest of my life. I feel like I'm in general a very happy person, even having a horrible cancer diagnosis and treatment, rigorous, very aggressive treatment and surgeries. but I still am able to form healthy relationships. But it's taken a lot of work, a lot of therapy, and I journal a lot. I love singing, so sometimes I write lyrics. And recently I picked up watercolor painting because nothing I was doing, saying positive affirmations or mantras. My therapist gave me mantras, which I thought were so stupid, but I actually started doing them and they were helping me with my anxiety. But yeah, the watercolor painting really helped me actually calm all of my like worrying thought, like all of my thoughts that were just uh, all over the place, and like the anxiety and the stress and the pain. So the thing is, I really like to try and excel at what I do. So now I've kind of taken a step back from watercolor painting at times because I'm starting to try and make it too perfect rather than enjoy the process. So, so I've got to work on that. I got to just do stuff that I enjoy doing. But I think the one thing I really like about it is that it pushes most of my thoughts out and I just focus on what I'm doing, and I'm very calm and relaxed and very content. So one thing I did want to talk about is my cancer journey. How it triggered a lot of my adoption trauma, and in many ways it felt very similar, but so much more physical acute pain. I think finding out that I had that and that it was BRCA2, that I'm BRCA2 positive, it kind of made me really upset that why didn't I ask more about family health history when I was a kid. So it was an eye opener for me that is really something the adoption industry fails at. They say this is for the best interest of the child. Well, then have open family health records. It's so vital. I mean, how many times have adoptees gone to doctor's appointments and they have to fill out paperwork and they ask all this family history and you're like, I don't know, I'm adopted. I mean, it's just so frustrating. I had to do that so much. And then there's so many things online now. They don't even give that option where you can just write adopted really, obnoxiously big. So yeah, that was very frustrating. And I decided to do another family birth search to let them know, because I knew I had all these other half siblings. I didn't know which side it came from, maternal or paternal. So I wanted them to know so they could share with their family members, but also to know if they knew of any family members that had it. And I was not lucky, I'm sorry. Like, it's more that when you have a health history, you can, there's like an act in Korea where they can be more aggressive in their search when there's a medical, issue with the adoptee. Then they can really use all their resources to track them down and make sure that they'll respond if they're still alive. And so I was really upset because my first mother was very angry, apparently, that she had been contacted again for the third time. And she, said, please do not contact me, because she still hasn't told her husband. I'm still a secret. Like, to this day, I'm still a secret. And I try my best to have empathy for her. I don't know the situation, but the only thing I can think of is if she were to tell him, and it would be so terrible, she would be in physical harm, like if he would physically hurt her or just leave her. I don't know. That's the only thing like my brain can think of. But yeah, she said that she didn't know of any cancer in the family. The only thing I learned was that my grandfather, her father, had died from hypertension. Well, he really would have died probably from a stroke from the hypertension. And And when they've got in contact with my father, he said he did not know if there's any cancer in the family. But yeah, so this is my first like news about my father, which was something new for me, very new. And he said, he asked if I wanted to do a DNA test. I'm like, oh, okay. So he doesn't even believe I'm his daughter. Forget this. I'm done, because I was in the middle of like chemo. I was about to get surgery. After that, I knew how to get radiation therapy. So I was like, I can't deal with this search anymore. I got no answers. Like, I don't even know if I believe them, because there's so much secrecy and lies surrounding adoption. And I know my mother can lie, because she's lying to her husband this whole time about having a daughter that she gave up for adoption. So that kind of just went out of my head for a while, because I was dealing with so much with my cancer treatments. I had very aggressive chemo. They call it, like, for 2 months, they called it, what I was given, the red devil. It's really adriamycin cyclophosphamide as the technical term for it, but it's like this red color, and you get so sick from it for the first few days. And then I remember after I had to start on the next chemo regimen, which is paclitaxel. It wasn't as bad, but at the end I became so ill. They really wanted me to go to the hospital to get like fluids or stuff, and I'm like, no, I can just work on my diet and get ready for this surgery. I really just don't want to go to the hospital for more stuff. And yeah, so time passed. I had this major surgery that was horrible. It's a bilateral mastectomy with lymph node removal. Then I had to go to occupational therapy. I could not lift my arm past like a few feet. Like, I was so flexible before. There's all these things that I lost, which made me think of adoption. All these things that I lost, that I'll have to process. Like, I'll have this chronic pain in my arm for the rest of my life. There's really nothing I can do about it, even with all the stretching and everything. So I'm at risk for lymphedema in my right arm. Yeah, so occupational therapy, I did that. I didn't realize that would be it. I didn't even know. I just didn't mentally prepare for the aftermath of this first major surgery. Yeah, everyone said chemo was the worst. I'm like, all right, I got chemo out of the way. I'm good to go for all these next things. And then I had the second surgery about 7 or 8 months later, and it was it was terrible. I mean, I was in the hospital not for 4 days, but for 10 days. I thought I was gonna die. It was a lot. And I remember not wanting to do the surgery, because I was so scared of, like, they told me after the first one that it was hard to wake me up after it. So I have a really not great reaction to anesthesia. So I told the anesthetist and the doctor, the surgeon, like, please don't give up on me. I was told that it's hard to wake me up on the last surgery. And they're like, okay, Shelby, don't worry, But I had to get a therapist then, because I was like a couple months before the surgery, because I was so anxious. And the complications, like, I had lost too much blood. Apparently I had to get my first blood transfusion. Thanks. I'm just so thankful for people who donate blood, because it really saves lives. Felt like it saved my life. And then there was when it appeared to be that one of the reconstructive surgeries didn't work. So they had to take me back in for exploratory surgery to see if there was bleeding, and like I was bleeding internally, but it wasn't, thank goodness. So I had to stay in the hospital to make sure all the swelling went down, and then I was okay. But it was like, so my mind trying to process all of this physical trauma from my body, also the fact that I barely could handle any of the pain meds. So I had to get on like the regular ibuprofen, just very high dose, as soon as possible, because I could not I could barely hold any food down. And so, you know, my mom came up with her husband, my stepdad, and took care of me for 3 weeks because my husband still had to work. So he would visit me in the evenings. And so yeah, it's just like I had all of this crazy physical trauma. And which is, when I think of it, it's like all of this stuff happens that you don't really remember the trauma, like the physical part, like how much physically you hurt, but you still process everything that happened to you afterwards. Like I still am, you know. And so everyone, I get upset when people say like that are watching a loved one go through it, like the cancer. Like they just want this next chapter to be done so they can close that chapter, you know, and move on. And I'm like, you're never gonna move on. Like I had to be on all of this medication afterwards to help prevent the cancer from returning. One of them was called Lynparza, and it caused severe headaches, severe fatigue, and nausea. So it's like I was almost on this low grade chemo for a year of my life. I lost so much weight. And because of my severe headaches, they ended up doing a brain scan. I needed to rule out to make sure the cancer hadn't spread. And so they found out that I had a brain tumor, which is like a meningioma. So they believe it to be benign. And I was just like, are you kidding me? So I had to have treatment for that, it's called gamma knife, which is like very targeted radiation. So I reached out again to my adoption agency in Korea, or the contact I had. And I said, please tell my parents over there so they can tell their parents about this new health issue that I'm dealing with. This is also something that can be genetic. And again, they all said they didn't know. And my birth father asked again if we could do a DNA test. And, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this because if that will make him more open with me, then okay, I will pay. It was like $75 to send the specific DNA test that they sent me to do. And I had to pay the $70 to have it shipped to Korea, which made me mad. Yeah. But it was a match, and it was like so quick. They asked if we could exchange information because my father wanted to contact me. And yeah, so it's been really, I haven't actually been super open about after being connected with him, because it's still something I'm navigating. But I think learning that from bits and pieces, it's hard with this translator app on the phone. It's called like Kyo Talk. That it sounded like he did not want to place me for adoption. Was really hard. So that's like just another piece of my story that I'm processing. So it's a lot. I'm very happy to be reconnected with him and to know that he cares for me. I found out that I have, a half brother on his side that has disabilities, like learning disabilities, and a sister that was very ill when she was a child, and they weren't able to get her the proper care. And so it's something that she's living with lifelong. So they both live at the home. So I feel like I get the empathy and compassion, it seems like, from my first father, because he seems like he's very caring. So yeah, my whole cancer journey has brought up a lot of adoption. and that's why. Yes.
So looking back on all this, where have you found this resilience from? Because it's an incredible story.
I really think it's from processing adoption for so long, since I was like 5. And being able to confront my emotions when they come up and not push them aside has really helped me be very resilient. I think it's because I've been always someone who wants to survive and always to attach. I think for me, I found out from my birth mom that she did keep me for two months, and she breastfed me. She knew that she wanted to do that. And I know I bonded with her, and I know that must have made it even harder for her to relinquish me. And then I know that I bonded with my foster mom in Korea because I met her when I was 17, and she's so loving, and she had a picture of me, whereas in a bathtub outside, a wooden little bathtub with my hair sticking straight up in a ponytail. It was adorable. And she said that her 2 kids and husband loved me too, and they wish they could have kept me. So I had 2 caregivers that I know loved me, and I had, really bonded with. I think it's really a struggle for adoptees that don't have that initial bonding in their first year of life. And they really, really struggle with attachment and trusting that, because they didn't have that. They weren't wired properly when they were in their formative, those first formative years. And I learned a lot about that from a trauma therapist, and it takes a lot of work. Like, I think generally I'm a pretty happy person. I'm so grateful to be alive. And so daily, what I work on is I do tell myself what I'm grateful for. I do feel very blessed. A lot of terrible things have happened in my life that was out of my control. Adoption was out of my control. Getting cancer was out of my control. And it's just how you work with what you're given, even if it's really hard.
Wow.
But yeah, so I don't want people to ever tell me how I shouldn't feel a certain way or what I should be grateful for. That's my choice, and I actively do that each day. I think in my 20s was when I found out through therapy that I was very codependent growing up. And it's funny because my mom would tell me that all the time when I was like in my late teens, and I thought, I didn't believe a word she said or like listen to her. And I'm like, oh yeah, she was totally right. But that's because she's codependent, which is very unhealthy. And so it took a really long time with a workbook, which is very unnatural, to retrain how I thought. And that's something I still actively have to do. It became more easy like in my early 30s, but I think after cancer, it started coming back. But that's, I think, because of being so isolated. I feel like I mourn the ability that all these other people had that have gone through cancer pre-pandemic, or now even, because people could be there when they were getting chemo. Like, I was in the facility for like 4 to 6 hours. I mean, it's not something quick. It takes like an hour. When you get chemo, it's like 4 to 6 hours. And I had to be alone. And so I feel like, a lot of adoptees that don't have open communication growing up, or even as adults, that maybe it's a subject they can't talk with their adoptive parents because it's too upsetting to them. They have to go on this alone. It's so isolating. And it's something you have to process later on when you finally are able to open up about it. So I don't know.
Wow, there's so much there. There's so much there.
I know. There's just so much, but I'm still like so much light. I have so much light, if that, is the right word to use. So grateful to be alive still. And it just makes me even more passionate when I have the energy to film other people's stories.
So if you're interested, listeners, you've got to check out in the show notes, as always. So I'm cutting you off a little bit there, but I'm conscious of time's moving on. So in the show notes, listeners, there's links to Shelby's website, and you can find out more about her work supporting other adoptees. But what a survival! What a story!
Yeah.
Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.